Welcome to this explainer. Today we are equipping you with a literal diagnostic field guide for the human mind. We're decoding the Dunning-Kruger social test. Look, if you've ever dealt with completely exhausting conversations and just felt your cognitive bandwidth draining away into absolutely nothing, well, you're in the exact right place. We're going to break down the hidden psychology behind human behavior, not just to understand the world a bit better, but to actively protect your daily peace. Let's get right into it.
So let's start by validating the universally frustrating experience. Have you ever found yourself presenting clear, objective facts to someone who is absolutely, undeniably wrong, and yet they argue back with total certainty? You know the type. Think about that person who passionately lectures you about a super complex topic they clearly just discovered from a single social media headline like 5 minutes ago, right? They're loud, they're incredibly confident, and they seem completely blind to the massive gaps in their own logic. It's so easy to just write these folks off as purely arrogant. But the science of psychology tells us there's actually something much deeper, biological, and honestly, incredibly fascinating happening just beneath the surface.
Okay, let's dive into this. The science reveals this isn't just everyday arrogance. It's actually a specific, measurable mental blind spot that actively prevents people from seeing their own limitations. We call it the Dunning-Kruger Effect. And the classic origin story for this research? It actually started with a wonderfully bizarre crime. A guy named MacArthur Wheeler robbed 2 banks in broad daylight, wearing absolutely zero disguise. When the police finally showed him the security footage, he was genuinely baffled. Why? Well, he had rubbed lemon juice on his face, truly believing that since lemon juice is used as invisible ink, it would naturally make his face invisible to security cameras. Psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger read about this and realized something pretty profound. When individuals have really low ability in a specific area, they suffer this massive dual burden. Not only do they reach totally wrong conclusions, but their sheer lack of knowledge actually robs them of their metacognitive skills. Now, metacognition is simply the ability to think about your own thinking. Because they can't perceive the true complexity of a topic, their brain basically tricks them into a false sense of security. They just naturally assume their simple surface-level opinion is the absolute, unquestionable truth.
Let's look at Section 1, the confidence illusion.
So, a lack of metacognition completely traps a person in surface-level thinking. On one side of the coin, you have someone throwing out a surface-level opinion with massive, booming confidence. They literally just don't know what they don't know. To them, the world seems incredibly straightforward simply because they haven't learned enough to see all the messy complications. Now, compare that to deep thinkers who actively use those metacognitive skills. Highly intelligent people are constantly self-monitoring. They're plagued by questions, constantly asking themselves things like, wait, what if I'm wrong about this? Have I actually looked at the alternative data? It's this fascinating paradox of the human mind. The more you actually know, the more you realize how much you don't know, which leads to a much more cautious, measured confidence. Without that crucial metacognitive check, a person is just trapped in a really loud illusion of certainty.
Moving right along to Section 2, Rigidity and Absolute Certainty.
Notice this stark contrast here between how different brains process the world. The rigid mind suffers from cognitive rigidity, which is basically an inability to think flexibly. You see, the human brain naturally wants to conserve energy, right? And holding nuance or paradox or conflicting ideas, that burns a massive amount of metabolic energy. A rigid mind finds complexity and multiple perspectives deeply threatening to its efficiency, so it just retreats to simple, safe certainties. In their world, everything absolutely must be categorized as 100% right or 100% wrong, good or evil, black or white. But a truly intelligent mind actually thrives on that cognitive complexity. It welcomes the metabolic burn of examining every single angle, exploring the gray areas, and weighing multiple possibilities at the exact same time, all without needing any immediate closure.
Which brings us to Section 3, the fragile ego.
So here's the really crucial point. When you challenge the viewpoint of someone who's overestimating their intelligence, they do not process it logically. Why? Because, as we just mentioned, logical debating requires heavy cognitive effort. For someone who lacks cognitive flexibility, encountering a contradictory fact instantly triggers the brain's threat detection system, the amygdala. The brain actually struggles to differentiate between a physical threat, like a predator, and an intellectual threat that's dismantling a core belief. So to them, an opposing opinion literally feels like a physical attack on their identity. They confuse basic, healthy disagreement with deep, personal disrespect. And as a result, they instantly resort to emotional defensiveness, instead of pausing to ask the absolute most powerful question in learning. What if I'm wrong?
When they encounter a new idea, their untrained brain instantly flags it as an ego threat, which causes this rapid retreat straight back into mental comfort, and this highlights a massive lack of curiosity. Real learning requires what neuroscientists call focused struggle. Building new neural connections is fundamentally uncomfortable. It's hard work. It's essentially going to the gym for your brain. While people who chronically overestimate their intelligence actively avoid this focused struggle. They're basically skipping mental leg day. To them, new ideas are never exciting opportunities for growth or exploration. They're just terrifying threats to their ego that absolutely must be deflected at all costs.
Next up, Section 4, Emotion and External Blame.
Watch closely how someone reacts when they're frustrated or offended through a process known as the cognitive shift. When frustration hits, everyone's brain, no matter how intelligent you are, initially triggers survival mode. But step 2 is where true intellect really shines, applying cognitive control to force a pause and deliberately shifting the brain into reasoning mode. It's all about creating that tiny gap between stimulus and response. Research consistently shows that lower cognitive ability often correlates with lower emotional intelligence. While smart people use cognitive control to thoughtfully formulate a response, those who overestimate their intelligence remain completely trapped in those reactive emotional survival states. They just lash out instantly, aggressively, and impulsively. And that raw emotional reactivity leads directly to a crucial divide, having an external locus of control versus utilizing error-based learning. Imagine someone gets passed over for a promotion at work. If they have an external locus of control, they instantly blame their boss, or bad luck, or office politics. They firmly believe that life just happens to them. And because of this, they completely miss out on self-pattern recognition. Highly intelligent people, by contrast, utilize error-based learning. When they get passed over, they calmly review their own mistakes, they examine their performance, and they actively seek to understand how their own choices shape that outcome. Look, automatically blaming external forces might protect your ego in the short term, but it entirely robs you of error-based learning, which just so happens to be one of the absolute fastest ways to improve your reasoning and actually succeed in the future.
Now for our final section, Section 5, the Ultimate Intelligence Test.
To synthesize all these cognitive blind spots into a practical mental toolkit, you really want to watch out for these 6 core patterns. Be extremely wary of overconfidence without foundational understanding, the rigidity of black and white thinking, the habit of confusing basic disagreement with personal disrespect, a total lack of curiosity about new data, poor emotional control when challenged, and of course, that constant default to external blame. Now, spotting these patterns isn't about judging other people. It's about recognizing when a conversation is absolutely futile. It's how you manage difficult interactions, decide when it's time to just walk away, and actively protect your peace and your cognitive bandwidth.
Because ultimately, the real tragedy of the Dunning-Kruger effect is that the lower a person's ability, the less likely they are to actually see their own flaws. They're literally blinded by their own mind, just trapped in a cage of false certainty. True intelligence isn't just about what facts you successfully memorized or how loudly you can debate a topic. It's about having the cognitive flexibility to admit when you just don't know something. It's having the wisdom to be entirely comfortable in the unknown.
So to truly pass the ultimate intelligence test, we've got to constantly ask ourselves this one vital question. Do you have the cognitive flexibility to admit when you are wrong? If you're engaged with this explainer, it's a tremendous sign that you actually value understanding the mechanics of the mind over simply needing to be right. Keep decoding those mental patterns, keep leaning into the discomfort of cognitive complexity, and never, ever stop asking why. Thanks so much for joining me to decode the mind today, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.